Do, 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 do. No, my water's in the frame. Oh man. See the nightmare that is my desk right now. Time for some spring cleaning. Hope you're all doing well. Let's see here. Got some before we get into topic, while we're letting folks join up and all that good jam. What can I talk about? Let's see here. First things first. This is a weird bittersweet day for me. So today is officially my 1 year anniversary at Amazon. Yeah, fun, right? So I hit my 1 year while at Amazon, and yet I'm laid off because I'm still in the window where I'm technically employed, but there's literally zero internal roles for me to transfer to. Jack bets if for some reason you're not hearing sounds, try just refreshing the stream because it seems like everybody else is hearing me. So yeah, fun times. But it's been going okay. Kingfisher's Catch was asking about how my job search is going. I actually had a really good interview the tail end of last week. Got informed late Friday that I'd made it to the next round of interviews, which is where they do. So if you're not familiar with tech, typically you have like a screen or a first interview with a recruiter. In this particular case with this company, and I'm not going to reveal anything until it's later, okay? So this particular company, a recruiter directly contacted me instead of me. Seems more quiet. Okay, hold on. Let me boost the volume a touch. It could be. I probably know why the volume issues are occurring. My computer force upgraded to Windows 11, and it has wonked with a lot of things. Anyway, I just pumped up the audio a little bit, so hopefully it's a little better for some of you that are hearing me kind of quiet. Anyway, so you have a screen, and then as long as they like you, then you'll usually get an interview with the hiring manager. So this is the person you're going to work for, right? Then you do an interview anywhere between half an hour and an hour, typically with the hiring manager. And then if the hiring manager likes you, now you'll go to the interview loop, where you'll interview with anywhere in between 4 and potentially 10 different people. So like when I interviewed for Amazon, for example, I interviewed with my manager and then made it to the loop interview. And at the loop interview, I had 6 hours of interviews with 8 total people. So you have to think about that. I had one day where I literally did 6 hours straight, effectively speaking. I had a small couple of breaks, but all of those were interviews. Thankfully, with this company, their loop interview is not quite that extreme. It's only 4 people, and each one is a half hour. So it's 2 hours total. Not too bad. And then, typically, if they like you, most companies either hire you from there or they have a final interview after that. So in this particular company, after the loop round, there's one more final interview after, but it's only half an hour. So we'll see. We'll see how things are going. I had to sign an NDA today, so a non-disclosure agreement that basically says like, hey, during the next series of interviews, we may potentially tell you things that aren't known to the public and ask you questions around those things. So just don't disclose that stuff. And here's an agreement that says you agree not to do so. Kind of interesting. But yeah. So far, doing okay. I feel super positive. It's kind of like when I was walking into my interviews at Amazon, and for Sven Courtney, who's in chat, my good friend Mr. Courtney there, I used to work with, he knew this the whole time, right? He was one of the few people that actually had inside info when I was leaving my old role and going to Amazon. During that time, like, I had this really good feeling. I don't know if maybe it's like, maybe you think it's cocky or confident, whatever, but I just felt like the right things were aligning, and there was obvious need at Amazon at the time, and I feel similar about this company right now, that my skills can directly help them improve. So feeling really good, actually. I actually celebrated, big quotation marks, I celebrated my 1-year anniversary with Amazon earlier today. while signing paperwork to do further interviews at a different company. I think it's hilarious to me. It's the weird, like, grim side of tech that you can look at very negatively, or you can look at very positively. Anyway, yeah, Geek Boy's like, Sun Microsystems was the worst for me. I think mine was close to 5 hours and 6 people. I mean, yeah, mine was 6 hours. I had 1 15-minute break and 1 half-hour break in that 6 hours of time. it was quite brutal. It's tough. And I mean, like, I've seen, when I used to work as a contractor at Microsoft, I've seen people doing their Microsoft interviews, and you've got people getting walked around the campus and escorted, and it's like, oh, it's time for lunch. Well, during your lunch is another interview. So, like, you're sitting in a cafeteria, kind of environment with this next person that's interviewing you while they're trying to, like, quickly have their lunch so they can ask you more questions. I talk about a high pressure environment, right? It's pretty wild. I've seen some crazy things in tech. But let us for a moment instead talk fish. And I have this lovely title here: Stop Chasing the Best and Do This Instead. And let me give you some preface. It is super common for us in the aquarium hobby, when we find someone that we trust their opinion, or maybe they've just been in the hobby for a super long period of time. Maybe we're trying to get into a particular part of the hobby. Like, maybe we're not very good at saltwater and we're interested in getting in saltwater. And so often we'll think about, like, okay, I want to do one really good tank, and what is the best X? And maybe that's, what's the best filter? What's the best heater? What's the best substrate? What's the best fish for this tank? Whatever it may be, right? There's a lot of ways that we could say, what's the best? Stop. And let me explain why. I was very recently, last week, I was on Dr. Mazeral's stream, right, for the Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fishes. Good to see you, Dr. Maz, in chat. And I had mentioned that very frequently I get this question a lot, and I used to even ask this question before I really kind of was, like, trying to do YouTube as another part of my hobby, right? I get asked, like, what is the best substrate is a super common question. And I mentioned this specifically because we're talking about substrate in plants, and my answer was really simple. There isn't one. Because if, let's say, as an example, you ask me, Bentley, what's the best substrate, or what's the one that you like? What's the one you've had the most success with? Whatever that may be, right? And I tell you, Brightwell Rio Oscuro or Stratum, right? Fluval Stratum, 2 of my favorites. They're the best. And then you build an aquarium that's all Java Fern, Anubias, Boos, nothing that actually gets planted into the substrate. All things that only feed off the water column, all epiphytes. Well, then it doesn't matter what your substrate is. right? These are things that we can run into where we will it's almost like a trick of the brain where the thought is, especially for those of us who aren't trying to um, go as absolute low budget, but it happens there too, and I'll explain in just a sec, right? Maybe we're trying to like, I want one really nice tank, so I'm going to go all out on this tank. I'm going to get this amazing light and great plants, and I'm going to do the thing and the stuff. It's going to be my one beautiful display aquascape. But if you chase what someone else tells you is the best, and maybe their water system or the way that they do their maintenance is different than how you are going to do things or what you have locally, then what is the best for them is probably not the best actually for you. Does that make sense? And let me explain. My water, right? The Northwest is pretty notorious. We have extremely low TDS, very soft but basic. And what that means is alkaline. So the pH is a little over 7, but there's really not a lot of mineral content to our water. So it's soft, but it's not acidic water, okay? If I tell you the best, X that I've ever used is this, and you live in Ohio, and your water is like liquid rock, and I'm giving you advice for soft water things, and you're trying to do that exact same thing in very hard water, you are likely to encounter a lot of problems and eventually maybe get to that point of like, this guy Bentley is full of it, right? And this kind of goes back to what we talked about last week. There is a level of, we need to keep in mind the variables that are different in every person's aquarium. So let's instead talk about what you should do. Or, you know what? One more example. Let's say we're trying to budget as best we can. Maybe we're just getting into the hobby. We don't have a lot of spare money. Maybe you're young, or maybe you're in a situation like I am. Economy's doing some bad things. You unfortunately got laid off from your job, but you've got too many baby fish in one tank, and you need to set up an extra tank, right? Baby fish is definitely not my problem because, as we know, I'm a terrible fish breeder because I don't try to. Other than my guppies, I let them do their thing. But let's say you need to set up an extra tank, or maybe like you already ordered some fish and you know they're coming, and now all of a sudden, instead of buying, well, I'm going to buy myself a great filter and I'm going to do this, you're like, hey, I need to bring it down a bit, be a little more economically savvy, save a few bucks, and just be cautious until I'm back to work and I'm back to having my fun budget, my fun money for fish. If we chase the best, and in this case, the best might be the cheapest options, we could also set ourselves up for failure. Instead, my suggestion is this. What we need to do is think about what the end game of our aquarium is. And then pick all the rest of the variables based on what that end goal is. So let me explain. Let's say I'm going to set up Bentley's favorite tank size of 40-gallon breeder. So I'm going to set up a 40-gallon breeder. Okay? I want to have some plants, but I don't necessarily need high demand plants. I don't want to do a lot of maintenance on the plants. I don't want to be trimming constantly. I don't want to go through I don't want CO2. I don't want to go through buckets of fertilizer. Okay, so I'm going to probably look at things like easier stem plants, or maybe Vallisneria. Maybe I'm going to look at some crypts. Maybe an Amazon sword, right? That's a plant that gets big, takes up a lot of space with only one plant. Maybe I'll look at Java ferns or some Anubias. All these things that don't need super strong light. So I probably don't need to look at that expensive Fluval light or that crazy Chihiro's light like Stephen P is going to put on his Java Fern aquarium, right? I can probably look at a more economically friendly light. Maybe it's something like the Fitix Stingray or one of the Higer lights. Maybe I want a little bit more control. I just don't want on and off, and I can't find that without spending about $60, right? Okay, $60 is fine, but it's not 200. So there's a way that we're not only saving some money, but selecting the right piece of equipment for the job. Now, can those more expensive lights that have tons of functionality do the same job? Sure. Do you need them? No. Again, let's go back to that. Okay, I'm going to do more simple plants that don't really have high nutrient demands. I'm not going to be getting crazy stems. Maybe I'm going to have like some Pogostemon octopus. Really easy one, right? Okay, we probably don't need a super crazy substrate. We can probably use something more simplistic. So we could look at something like potentially doing, say, Safety Zorb that you can get a giant 40-pound bag of for like $12. Or maybe you're looking at just Echo Complete. It's not very expensive, but it's still got a bunch of benefits to it and does a really good job. You don't necessarily need ADA Amazonia, right? Or UNS Contrasoil, or any of these are more expensive substrates that we usually use for our higher demand plants. Can you use them? Of course, but you don't need them. So you don't need the best substrate. You need the right substrate for the job. Similarly, if we're putting together an aquarium for just shrimp, the thing Bentley can't do right? Shrimp. Well, shrimp don't need to be at hot temperatures for Neocaridina. Let's say Neocaridina. We're going a basic shrimp tank, right? So we probably don't need to care about what heater's in our tank. We probably can go with no heater in our tank, and the shrimp will do just fine. This is what I mean by pick the things that are right for your aquarium. It's not about the best, because often the best is way more than we actually need. And if you go back and look at some of my plant talks that I've done at some clubs, I have a part of my cheat system, as I like to call it. And one of the things I say is to hack. And by hack, I mean design things in a way that give you exactly what you need, and don't try to go overkill. Just because, Bentley likes Fluval Stratum and says it's the best thing, doesn't mean that you actually need Fluval Stratum in your planted tank. There are tons of people that have success with the Wallstad method, dirted tanks, DIY substrates, clay kitty litter as a substrate. Does Bentley use it? No, but can you have success with it? Absolutely. You don't need to necessarily chase the best. And I think part of the problem is that we, in the creator space, are almost incentivized to tell you X thing is the best, whatever it does, because it draws attention. But I'm here to tell you, anytime someone tells you X is the best, call bull on it. It ain't true. There is always a scenario where that thing is the absolute worst option out there. It is all about figuring out your end goal and designing the aquarium around that goal. Legion Aquatics just mentioned root tabs with gravel, low light. You can be very successful with those things, and all of those are cheap, right? As long as you select the right things in your aquarium, that will be successful in that. If you're trying to pick like, oh, I'm going to have Ludwigia white and Crypt pink flamingo and all these like super high demands, and you put them in low light basic gravel with just root tabs, they're probably not going to be successful, or at least not to the way that you want them to be. They might survive, maybe, but not the way you want them, not what you're shooting for. So what we want to do is anytime we approach a new aquarium, don't worry about is X better than Y? Is the Aqua Clear better than the Tidal, better than the Whisper, better than... No. Just ask yourself, does this do what I need it to do? Don't go as cheap as possible. If you can afford to, get something a little bit better in quality, but you don't need to shoot for the most expensive, nicest, fastest, best, whatever. Flexibility is better, but you don't need something insane. You just don't. So we got some questions in the chat. That's kind of my spiel for this evening, but one is a good one that ties into this. So like Nabokov fan says, one of the most common things people forget is cheap does not mean best budget device. It better survive a splash or at least a certain amount of time to be valued for the hobby. And that's a great point. Like there are several things out there that are designed to attract our eyes, especially on Amazon or other like online marketplaces where the price is just so low. You're like, man, this thing looks great and it's so cheap, but then like the second a swift breeze hits it, it's dead, right? So there is a difference between being a more budget-friendly or economically friendly item versus just being cheap. An example would be some of the like JCMP lights or the Hygger lights. I've tested a bunch of those JCMP lights. The most recent design of them, actually a fairly nice light in the grand scheme of things. Similarly, like you could say in some regards, the Aquarium Co-op's new light or their heaters are slightly more budget friendly for the level of quality you're getting, right? They're still a little expensive compared to some other options, yes. But for the product quality you're getting, they're competing against much more expensive products, right? And similarly, there's lots of Hygers that do that, some of the Phoenix products that do that, but I've had bad luck with Phoenix, so I can't always give them the love that maybe others would, because I've had plenty of times where Phoenix has been like, barely got splashed with water, immediately died. And it has driven me up the walls, because also Phoenix tends to have like very short warranties, where other products that are out there have usually better warranties at a similar price point and quality. So just find that mixture of things that is the right amount of X that your tank needs at a good price point, and you'll be okay. Let's see here. One of the other questions I wanted to cover. Hold on, scroll up. It was a good one. It was about plants. Wow. No. There we go. This is also from Nabokov fan. I thought it was from somebody else, but its chat was going by fast enough. Sorry. A legitimate question given a topic. How would you answer what is the best plant for a beginner or intermediate hobbyist? What fits the bill plus success / positive times in the hobby? Sure. Well, I think you have to address that to a number of different categories, right? So like, I love Java Fern, but I don't think that's the easiest epiphyte to grow. I think Bulbitis is. Bulbitis can take almost no light and upwards of medium and even high light and still do phenomenally well. It's a little bit more robust to plant, but it likes a touch of mineral content, which most of us are probably buffering our water in some way, shape, or form, so that's okay. It isn't as demanding as Java Fern is on like a single thing. So like for me, A really good epiphyte plant is Bulbitis. I also really like not so it's an Anubias, but not Nana Petite, regular Nana. It's slightly larger leaf, but not quite as big as Barteri. But I've just found that tends to be the petites and like Nana Golden and some of that stuff. They're all a little more fragile sometimes when you're first transitioning them into the aquarium. Where in my experience, regular Nana is really, really good, right? It's a lot more robust and able to handle those transitions. Let's go into stems. I think two of the easiest stems out there are Ludwigia repens. It grows all over the place in the United States. It's a really durable plant. It can handle cool water. It can handle warm water. Also, Pogostemon stellatus octopus. They're both fairly easy plants. Just the Pogo is a much more aggressive grower. But they give you two different options. You get a little bit of red with the Ludwigia. You get this nice, cool, long, whippy leaf shape out of the Pogostemon. So you can have the two in the same tank. They look very different, and they look very nice together, right? Those are both super easy plants. When it comes to mosses, Java moss. It's the easiest. You can look at Christmas moss too. That's probably the second easiest, but it's sometimes a little harder to find, where you can almost find Java moss everywhere. The big thing is just kind of understanding that a detritus buildup on moss can be a killer, in the sense of it'll piss the moss off. So it kind of needs flow, but it's probably the easiest of like the mosses that's out there. When it comes to rosette plants, so these are going to be plants that, like your crypts and your swords, the stuff you plant inward and they have a little crown. Regular Cryptocoryne Wendetii is really, really robust. It's a really healthy plant. It looks nice. But honestly, probably the easiest in that category is like regular Jungle Val. Jungle Val, sometimes it takes a little while to settle in before it starts sending its runners, but it's just a super robust plant. It's very easy. It can handle a super wide range of things. And when like you get a temperature swing from summer to winter or whatever, it doesn't get as angry at you as crypts sometimes can. Sometimes crypts just like to be a little angry and go like, nope, don't wanna, and melt back. They almost always come back, but it's one of those things where it's the little finicky part of the plant where you almost never see that with other things. Hygrophila polysperma is being mentioned. That's an invasive species of plants, actually. It's one of those things that actually is getting... I think it might be on the federal list at this point in the United States, so I can't say I suggest it, because it's just a hyper invasive plant. But yeah, it grows on everything. But you know, there's the other thing that you can look at is something like this. The standard Amazon sword is another really great plant. And then if you want to start getting toward like bulb plants, I think the easiest is probably the just like the dwarf aquarium lily, so Nymphaea rubra. You can also look at like the tiger lotus, but I've seen more people struggle with that particular one. So you know, I would just in general say you're probably better with the regular dwarf aquarium lily. It's a great little plant. It's beautiful. It's got nice color to it. Doesn't really take a ton to keep it happy. So, you know, that's kind of like here's my list of easy plants by their style. As opposed to like, this is just the easiest plant, because there's lots of options. If you're trying to do a carpet, then the next thing I would say is look at Pygmy Chainsword, which is, I think it's a Halanthium now. And not, it used to be considered Echinodorus, but now they've re-typified them. But it's Halanthium tenellum, if you want the scientific name. The dwarf hair grasses are not super easy plants. They can be kind of finicky. So, you know, just tons of those things. Lots of different plants in there that you have options with. And there's other stuff that, like, depending on your water, like you have really soft water, there's a ton of stuff that becomes way easier to grow. Are you in really hard water? Well, then you want to start looking at stuff that maybe comes out of places that naturally have harder water, like stuff that grows in the Congo River Basin, as an example. Bulbitis is a great example of that, right? Things that can handle harder water naturally. Joe Sneed, could a couple of dojo loaches be happy in a 40 breeder? For a period of time, yes. But eventually, as they get long, when you start getting them to like 8 inches, they're going to really want a little extra room to just whip around. But that's mostly when they're being active. When they're active, they love some space to go back and forth and do their things. I just did a big water change on my 75-gallon long downstairs that her thickness, the Loach Princess, is in. And she has been, for the last like day and a half, just like constantly swimming back and forth. Because after big water changes, she's just like, woo! She's losing her mind. Plus, we had the aquarium auction recently at my club, so I thinned out a ton of Java Fern and opened up a ton of swim space for her. And so she's just like losing her mind, happy, swimming all over the place now. It's kind of enjoyable to watch. But yeah, I mean, could you do them for a while in a 40 breeder? Yes, but as they get bigger, you're going to want to get them into something a little bit larger. Really what you want is that length side to side. It's kind of like rainbow fish. Can you raise rainbow fish for a while in a 40 breeder? Absolutely. Can a bunch of species of rainbow fish do fine if there's only a few of them in a 40 breeder? Absolutely. But if you're going to start getting any more numbers beyond, like, say, 2, or just when they start hitting their max size, getting something with a little bit more swim space, they will be happier and live a better life in the long run. But can you do 2 in it? Yeah. Yes, you can. Connor Costello, to you, what does the light requirements mean to you, and how can you know, like, some websites say a plant can be grown in medium to high light. How do you tell what light you have? A good question. Oh, man. Okay, how do I answer this? So, for the most part, this is, outside of having a par meter, this is actually a really tough thing. I have just gotten used to what certain amounts of light look like to my eyes. But the short version of it is, if you have a light that is adjustable, typically the like 0 to 30% is about your low light. And then when you get like 30 to about 70%, it's kind of your medium light. And then anything above that is usually starting to get into your highlight of intensity. How do you know what that is on any given light, especially if it's not an adjustable light? That's where that becomes really tough. But basically, if you look, like an example here, right? In my Fluval Flex, this is the light at maximum. And I would say at best, this is medium light. And you can see it. Now, granted, it's being lit by a bigger light over here. But if I were to turn that light off and you would have just the camera looking here, you would get a rough idea of like how much light this is. And this is medium light. So if we dim that down by about 50% or so, we're getting into low light. If we increase it by about 50%, we're going to start getting into like the threshold of high light. It's all done based on a measurement of par. And if you have someone local that has a par meter, perfect. You can measure your par and get an understanding. But it's one of those things where it's very objectively subjective. And I know that's confusing. But what I basically mean is that actually understanding low, medium, high becomes a little different as far as just like when you're looking at it. And for some people, what they might perceive as low light is not low light by the standards that you'll see on the internet, but that's kind of just a loose association and not something truly scientific, if that makes sense. I know it's not a perfect answer, but it's the closest I can give you without like basically saying you need to have a par meter. And then like every person shouldn't need a par meter. One thing you can look at is the output. So usually each light has a certain number of watts of output, and that can give you some idea based on the size of the light about how much intensity it can put out at its maximum power. Oogie. Sid Miller, can you talk about Aponigeton? How do I get mine to thrive, and how do I propagate? Okay, so almost all Aponigetons, to propagate them, you need to get them to flower. Most Aponigetons start flowering in spring. They're very seasonal plants, and typically they will flower around spring. And what you need to do is you need to have 2 different Aponigetons of the same species, right? You almost always can't do this internal to the self of the plant, but there is a few rare exceptions. Basically, you need to take like a small paintbrush, like what you get at a craft store or something like that, and run the bristles over the flower to get the pollen, and then bring that pollen and cross-pollinate it over to a different flower, like you would with a bee, right? What a bee would do in nature naturally, right? Where they go in, they do their thing, they're collecting, they get pollen on their body, they go to the next flower, they're rubbing around, they're getting new stuff off of that one, and they're kind of cross-pollinating these plants. Then, in theory, if you've done everything right, it'll go to a seed state and produce seeds. And those seeds can then be grown out into new Aponigetons. The easiest way to grow them out is typically immersed. So that would require you to set up like an entirely different rig in order to start getting them going. But that's a little complicated. How do you get them to thrive? That's a bigger part, right? Because they're not going to flower if they're not thriving. Aponigetons are really, really strong root feeders. So the first thing you want to make sure you're doing, even if you have a really great substrate, like you're using ADA Amazonia or Fluval Stratum or any of those, right? Root tabs. Root tabs are your friend. Make sure they have lots of nutrients right at the roots. Second, Aponigetons, like a lot of your rosette-style plants, so plants that plant in, typically don't necessarily care about super intense light. Aponigetons usually like about a medium area of light. You don't need to go super powerful. What they care about is a long photo period. They do all their best growing in spring and summer when there's lots and lots of light through a large portion of the day. So the way that I have usually found success with Aponigetons in the past is by giving them less intense light. So instead of having like my effluvals at max, I'll bring them down to like 70% at the tops, maybe even a little less, depends on how tall that aquarium is. But I'll have those lights on. Instead of being only on for 6 to 8 hours, I'll have them on for 12. So they get that nice long growth period, and they have access to nutrients right at their roots, so they can constantly chew through all that food source, photosynthesize throughout the day, grow, and establish a nice big root system. Here's where the next thing is. If you don't have super good space for them to establish roots, and what that usually means is a thicker substrate. If you've only got like 3 inches of substrate, you're probably not going to see them really thrive. They want to be able to build a deep root system. So you're going to want to make sure you have a slightly thicker layer of substrate for them to dig those roots in, spread them out, take over a big space, and really establish themselves in order to then grow much more foliage and become much more dense, robust, and to that point that we're going to go, now we probably have enough nutrients, we're doing all the right things, now we can start flowering, right? One other way that you can encourage all of this to occur, if your light is adjustable, especially if you can just adjust individual spectrums, push more red light. Red light encourages 2 things. It encourages your leaves to grow a bit taller and a little bit leggier if it's a stem plant, but in the case of plants that can flower, red light encourages flowering. So if you're trying to get more flowers out of some of your plants, or you just want them to grow a little taller, give them more red, yellow, orange type lights. Getting into that red spectrum encourages them to grow a little bit taller and start flowering. That would be my first starting points on how to have a little bit more success with Aponogetons. There are other ways to propagate Aponogeton, but they're very complicated. Certain species are self-propagating. I have Madagascar lace plant, which is an Aponogeton species that will self-propagate. It literally will just self-pollinate, send out seeds, send out runners sometimes, and be fine. There are other ones that won't do that. So it depends kind of on each individual Aponogeton. The most official way is cross-pollination from flowers. Hopefully that helps you, Sid. Kingfishers catch. Any tips for photography of fish? My Melanda Williams Creek are all fired up and displaying. However, they are skittish. Yeah. Get a tripod. Put your camera on a tripod. Just sit it in front of the tank and walk away. Get them used to the camera being there. Now, if you're in a warm, humid room, you might have to do some adjustments, right? You might need to have a dehumidifier going to make sure there's not too much humidity so it doesn't mess with your thing, but you don't need to have the lens open or anything like that if you're using like a DSLR or mirrorless. If you're using your cell phone, find something that looks similar to that and have it just sit near their tank so they see it. And if they realize that the more it's there and it's not a threat, they'll stop being as scared of it. I used to, before some of my fish got a little more relaxed, I used to bring in one of my cameras and I would just set it on a tripod with all its lens covers and all the things on it and just let it sit there in front of a tank for hours. So that the next day when I brought it in and tried to film, my fish would be less scared of it. Now from there, it's all about lighting and make sure your front glass is nice and clean so you don't have stuff mucking up your image. You know, don't be Bentley. Don't be lazy about cleaning your front glass and have it make everything look fuzzy and smudgy, right? Clean your glass if you're going for really nice, high quality photography. You want good lighting that comes in at upper angle. Same with your photo. So like if your fish is here, you want to be taking a photo up from here a little bit because that's going to allow the angle of what you're viewing to get some of the light's natural reflection off of the scales of the fish. That's going to help make the color more vibrant, especially in the case of rainbow fish. And then from there, it's just setting up your camera with the right settings to catch them because they're fast-moving fish, and that can be tough to catch if you're, say, like shutter speed's really slow or some of the other things that are variable in the camera settings themselves. But yeah, that'd be my advice on that particular topic. But I am not really that great at taking pictures of fish, but that's what I've learned from people who are very good at it, and I've tried my best to replicate it. Robert Johnson, how long does green water take to bloom? 20 gallon long, open top, high nitrates, basic nitro light. I've had the light on for about 56 hours straight. It really depends. I know some people who have their method of creating green water and they can get green water in like 48 hours. But the prep to make it get to that point is about a week. So you might be looking at somewhere where you need a week or so before it finally establishes itself. But it's getting there. Just patience is a virtue. Especially in fish, patience is your best friend. Okay. Oh, man. I've seen some troll comments in regards to our topic. Legion Aquatics. Do you know why low-tech and more natural aquarium methods aren't being pushed as much on the internet, at least on YouTube? I think plenty of them are being pushed on YouTube. You have entire channels like Father Fish who dedicate to what is an attempt to replicate a more natural environment out there. I think the difference is a lot of what we see when it comes to big planet aquariums is aquascaping. And trying to do an aquascape in a fast period of time with the extremely high needs to get those dynamic and almost diorama looking tanks You just can't do that with the more natural methods. Now, if you're trying to do a more simple tank and you're not trying to go like this crazy nonsensical aquascaping thing, it's just a matter of the content creators you're looking for. PecTech is a great example. Nabokov fan mentioned this. He does a ton of like lower tech, pretty easy aquariums that look fantastic. That guy has pieces of Anubias that make me jealous because they look like they take up a 40-gallon breeder on their own, and I can't get my mind to get that large. You know, it's just a matter of like there are some things that people are successful with the way they do things versus others. So it's one of those things where I wouldn't stress too much about why it's not being pushed. It's more a matter of like, are do the people who talk about those things actually put together high quality videos? And I can probably go on a small rant. There's another question I want to answer real fast, but I do want to talk about this briefly. I recently did some like personal investigations in a sense where I looked at a few of channels I'd never seen before that started popping up in my feed that compared to a lot of other fish creators are monstrous. And I looked at the videos they do, and there are all sorts of things that are basically just they may be falsified, to be honest, because it doesn't seem possible for some of these channels to have the subscriber counts they have based on like what I've seen of their view counts. But like an example would be the like this is a positive example of this, right? Not a negative. But in the sense of like look at MD Fish Tanks, right? He creates a very vlog style. He's got a lot of energy. He's very entertaining. He's very engaging. He's always doing a new aquascape or some new thing that keeps you kind of coming back and interested, right? I think he's doing it one of the best out there. Just understanding what keeps our attention. What keeps this like lizard brain thing paying attention, right? But you don't see that much dedication to editing, general filmography, and all the other work necessary to make that video quality that high. Like I certainly don't do things to that quality. I don't have the time. I have to have like a full-time career on top of all the other things I do, right? Where like that is his career. But you don't see that in a lot of the other people who are, whether they're knowledgeable or just presenting this is the style of aquarium they like, and they do. And that might be part of the why you don't see it as much, is that the people who really put in the incredible effort, and like I said, MD, perfect example. And I love that guy to death. I hope I get an opportunity to meet him in person just because he seems like such a fantastic dude. That energy, that much work, all those kind of things that it takes to consistently make content to that level of caliber while pushing the things that interest him the most. Like, what's the one thing that I would say as a technique people have learned from MD Fish Tanks? Substrate in a bag that makes it reusable. Right? Like, that's one of the things that I think is one of his hallmarks of things. There's like, this is the MD Fish Tanks thing. This is like his method, and it's a super smart trick, right? But you don't see, on YouTube at least, that level of effort put toward, and not to rag on Father Fish, I want to be very clear, but like something like Father Fish. Father Fish teaches a method that's extremely natural, right? It's all about like, we have plants, we don't really have a high fish load, because in nature there's just so much water that there's not a high fish load. We're doing this specific method that occurs in nature and does these things, but you don't see that like crazy level of MD Fish Tanks editing, etc., going into it. Right? And for some of us, Kelly Foreman makes a great point. For some of us, like, the fact that a tank is never around for more than like 6 months at a time can be exhausting. But that is what gets eyeballs in the world of YouTube. And so in the end, that's what makes that style of tank or this style of X, Y, and Z way more prevalent and consistently visible compared to, say, like those like even me, like I'm kind of a just like set it and forget it mentality, right? I put plants in a place and I kind of just let them do their thing. So, there's things like that, right? I think there's an inherent part of the YouTube and content sphere that drives certain people to watch things and get those messages more, and those people out there that are on the more natural aquarium route just aren't doing like that level of craziness, right? So yeah, Aquarium Plant Lab. Hey, buddy, it's good to see you. I might be coming back out to the island relatively soon, so get in touch with me. Man, I went on a deep rant, but I got some other stuff. Brian, I promise I'll get to your question, but there's one other I want to get first. This is from Atkins Acer Aquarium. Just going back to our Aponigeton question. I was able to propagate Aponigeton longiplumosus. I'm bad at pronouncing this particular one. Longiplumosus. I screw it up every time. Without flower. I don't know why. It sent little buds. It grew leaves and roots. I cut them off. Still confused by this. So certain Aponigetons will basically send like their own runner child plants. Not all of them do. Some do. I didn't know Longiplumosus was one of those. I've never tried to keep that particular plant, but I do know that there is some Madagascar lace that will and others that will not. I happen to have the one that will. So it's like little things like that. Trebacloud, does the red light apply to Anubias flower? Yes. Red light in general promotes flowering activities out of plants. Pam S. Okay, because there was someone else that did this question. How long do root tabs last? Ooh, good question. When do I need to add more? Also, if I use equilibrium, do I add per gallon or to the amount of the water change? Okay, 2 questions. Let me first address the equilibrium question. So typically when we have water evaporation, that mineral content is staying in there. So usually what we want to do is, if you have a TDS checker or something like that, check your TDS, then figure out how much water you're changing, or how much, basically you need to figure out how much you're going to dilute this back down by with the new water coming in, and then adjust your equilibrium accordingly. So an example would be, if we're only topping off, we probably actually don't need to add equilibrium. We're going to have a really minimal change, or at least not every time we top off. But if we're doing a water change and it's gone down like 20%, and then we're going to drain 50%, right? So now we're at 40% water, roughly. Then 60% of our water needs to be remineralized. Does that make sense? Make sense? Kinda, sorta, maybe not. But just, you basically are typically only accounting for the fresh water coming in, not necessarily the total volume of water, because otherwise your mineral content will just keep going up. That's the short version. That's the Bentley don't be too damn complicated version. Now let's talk root tabs. It is really dependent upon how large the plant is. An example, a really young Amazon sword is probably going to go through like 1 root tab every month to month and a half. A big Amazon sword might go through a root tab in like 7 to 10 days. What I would say is, in general, if you're using the smaller capsule type root tabs like the Aquarium Co-op, the Nylock G Thrive, etc., 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 all the ones that look like a little pill capsule, I would do, if you have a heavy root feeding plant, if it's a brand new tank, once a month for the first like 4 months or so. Once we start getting good density of plants, then about every 2 to 3 weeks. Depends on how often you're doing water changes and other fertilization. Are you adding like liquid fertilizer too? Probably 3 weeks to a month is okay. Are you only relying on those root tabs? Might want to do it every other week, right? If you're using a larger tab that's a little bit more robust, something like the Seachem Flourish tabs, right? They're those weird little like hexagonal things, um, where it's not quite a smaller root tab, then we might be able to just do once a month, and maybe it's only we put in one for the first 3 months, then we put in another one for a couple months, then after 2 months, now we're at month 6, now we start doing one a month. Hope that makes sense. You don't have to do them super often. Plants will hold a lot of nutrition in their roots, so even you could probably get away with just once a month. But if you've got like a monster, one of those super huge that makes everybody jealous, like Amazon swords, that bad boy's chewing through stuff, and you probably want to give it root tabs every other week. But if for the most part, your plants aren't like megalithic huge, you just got a pot where the crypts is starting to get dense, and I've got an Aponogeton over here in the corner, and I got a kind of a smaller sword, like a ruffle sword or something like that. Once a month, you'll be fine if it's established. If it's real early in the tank, put in some root tabs, let them go for like 2 months, then put in some more, and then as it gets dense, now start doing it like once a month, and you'll be all right. Okay. Hope that helps for Pam. And the other person who was like ditto. I think I missed it trying to scroll back, but good question. Good question. I love questions like that because they let me talk too much. Oh, man. Bob Purcell, is there a minimum temperature in which Anubias and other epiphytes will flower? Not to my knowledge. I've seen that when I've seen the best flowering out of a lot of my plants tend to be in that like 74 to 76 range. So very like spring, summery temperatures, things like that. Explains why my plants are suffering. Planted a tank 5 months ago and haven't added more. Yeah, get some more in there. You might even be able to do like once every 2 months and still be okay. But yeah, if you got real heavy root feeders, just give them a little bit of love. Be all right. You'll be all right. Now I'm going to go back to Brian's question, so I don't want to skip it because it was good. Any advice for writing a breeding report? I'm writing the first Pitbull Pleco 1 for Planet Catfish since 2004. Shane's World article. I'm trying to convince people this is easy. Well, the Pitbull Pleco is really cool, for one. I find them very interesting. I would say look at a number of different breeding reports from different writers. And just find the elements that are common to every single one of those. And then figure out what seems really good. You know, like what order of information do you feel is best for you? And things like that. I think there's tons of options on how to read any kind of report like that. It's just a matter of your own personal writing style and making sure you cover the critical information. So that's why I would say look at other reports and look at their information and go like, you know, I like the way this format is done. Or this seems the most logical way to understand what's going on, and do X, Y, and Z and help people be successful. And then the rest of it will just kind of write itself. Like, you know, in a, I'm going to bring my working world into this for a moment. At Amazon, I know, I technically don't work there, but I do at the same time. But we have this process that we call working backwards. Okay? And I love this process. I think it's really good for tech in general, especially someone like me who works in quality assurance and software testing, which is to say, we think about what the end result is in the customer's hand. So in this case, the person that's going to read that report when it's done. And we got to think about all the things they need to be successful. And then we start working backwards to build our plan. So we start thinking about the end product. And then we think, okay, what's the next step? Before we release that report, what do I need? Well, I need a section that explains the parameters for survival. I need a thing for food. I need a thing for like cave information. You know, what size cave do I need? Do they prefer a certain type of material over another? You know, whatever, all those little things, right? These are the big important chunks of detail. We're not looking for small details. Then we work to the next step. In each of those sections, what are all the small details that are critical and matter? And just like literally bullet point them, right? Super easy. We're just building like a skeleton. And then you get all the way back to the last part. It's like, all right, what's the flow of this thing from the technical perspective to make sure temperature, okay, consistency of food. What do I feed the initial fry? How long are they going to have the yolk sac? All those little tiny details. And then from there, just start plugging it in and writing it. It'll do the rest. It'll do the rest of the work for you. It's one of the smartest things that I think Amazon taught me while I was working there was that mentality of working backwards. Work from the final result and work backwards to build your plan. And then put your plan into action. It's a phenomenal way of doing work. Okay, I think I can get like one more question. Caitlin DeRozier. Hey, buddy. I've always wanted a Madagascar lake, and my puffer has decided to turn my sword into one. But where's the best places to get the real thing for a different tank? Hobbyists tend to be the best. Madagascar lace has been way less popular lately in the sense of being more readily stocked in a lot of places. But I think part of that is it's a more seasonal plant. You tend to see it more in spring and summer than you do in the winter months because they don't. A lot of Aponegitans, especially Madagascar lace, can be a little tricky to ship. That being said, I have a kind of young one, so if you need one, just let me know. I can supplant my young one and move it. I don't care. I don't care that much. I don't mind it going away. Ooh, fun questions. Oh no. Seachem revised their root tabs are no longer the little like weird hexagon blocky things. They're dead to me now. Those were the best. I love those stupid things. They're so easy for me to plant. Oh man. Okay, Paul Saltero, we're deep. We're deep now. How much fish poop equals one root tab? Inquiring minds want to know. The thing is, root tabs are usually a combination of nutrients and some amount of like mineralized clay or soil in them. So all the micros and stuff that they provide just aren't going to be in your fish poo. But I would say that you need a substantial amount of fish poo to equal a root tab. Like pleco levels of fish poo, where it's in there, and like you dig your siphon in there, and just like the chocolate milk death is coming up your tube when you're doing water change levels for a while, like a good 20 seconds worth, or it's just like that's holding some stuff. But yeah. Greg Jones. Oh, here we go. A fellow creator. We're sold the best to the biggest because hyperbole is used to create desire. No one needs the IFGA guppies if they don't know how to line breed, yet learning skills is priceless. I agree with that statement. A ton. And Brian Kim, I'll try to get your question really, really fast. Excuse me. Tips on changing safeties or charging safeties orb. I've got an empty 40 breeder. I have like the best. I wish this guy still created fish content because I think a lot of his stuff was really smart. Hold on. It's, if I remember right, Mischief and Fins, I believe, is his channel. Hold on. Man, having to find this thing is... What? Problem. When you don't create content anymore, you fall on the results. It gets so hard to find this excellent, amazing video that he produced about charging Safety's Orb. Specifically Safety's Orb. But here. If you look up, just in case you don't happen to see this, I'm going to post it in chat. But look up a channel called Mischief and Fins and look up DIY Substrate. It'll have a not so great thumbnail where it looks like he's trying to pour some jug of something into a cup over an aquarium. But honestly, best video about how to charge any of the DIY substrates out there. Really, all you actually need is magnesium and calcium in these things. But you can add some of the other like micronutrients if you want to. However, and yeah, local new local Austin. It's actually specifically this Safety Sorb is the product. You can get it at a Tractor Supply Company if you've got one near you, and it's dirt cheap, looks good, very effective. It is made out of montmorillonite clay, which will raise your general hardness. Just be aware of that. But it's a really good way to naturally raise your hardness that won't really expire very quickly. And then if you charge it even further with magnesium and calcium, it's the best. Oh, okay. So, gang, that's going to cover us for this week. Next week, my club has a meeting, but I don't think I'm going to it. I have some other stuff that's going to, like, keep me at home most of the day. And also, it's a saltwater talk, and I'm not doing saltwater anytime soon, so I'm not so sure I'm super interested in it. But so I will most likely be doing another stream next week instead of like trying to do something in place of a club talk. But yeah, also not this upcoming weekend, but the weekend after. So if you happen to be in the Great Northwest, make sure I get my date right over here. That's going to be the 13th of May. The Greater Portland Aquarium Society is having their plant and fish auction. So only live goods, no like tanks or things like that. But if you're in the Portland area, I'm probably going to head down there unless like the world comes to an end or something drags me away, which is possible. But I'm going to go hang out basically. So if you want to come hang out in Portland, maybe buy some stuff at an auction, check that bad boy out. As always, gang, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Oh, also, I'll do this now. You just hear it for a minute, but this week I'm probably going to drop a very different video. So, you know, be prepared for a kind of not fish related video. Yeah. Have a great night, everybody.